Hi, everyone. I want to get started here with a demo on how to do a drawing of something recognizable. And we're going to talk about drawing a pear today. This is sort of a demo of exactly what you're going to do in your next exercise, which is going to be to draw an apple. So to get started, I have a photograph of a pear, right? I'm going to work from that photograph and use it as a model. I'm going to flip over to Photoshop so you can see what I've got. I have a JPEG here that I've downloaded from the web. This is a stock photo. The photo itself is not going to be part of the finished drawing. So the source of the photo is sort of up to you. It doesn't, when you're working on a vector illustration, you're using a reference. You're not including that artwork. So you have a little bit more freedom in terms of where you get your images from. And so I'm using this particular stock photo. You can see it has this, what we call a watermark on it. I haven't paid for this stock photo. I'm just going to use it as a sort of a model, and I'm going to make changes, make my own artistic interpretation of this. Okay, so to get started in Illustrator, I've created a new document, and you can see that here. You're going to do that by going to File, New, and choosing a new document. Now, the size is not critical. Remember that one of the values of working in vectors is that it's scalable. So I can take this file and make it much larger and much smaller. I just don't want to start so small that I don't have room for the details I want. So I have an 8.5 by 11 like letter size document here on the horizontal landscape. To bring in my photograph to work from, I'm going to use the place command. So I go to File and I choose Place, and then I navigate out to that particular document. Let's see. Here we are, greenpear.jpg, and I'm going to place that document. Now you'll notice when I choose Place and I have selected my file, I get this little like thumbnail that hangs out with my cursor. The easiest way to place this is actually to click and drag. That way I can control its size in the document that I have. And there we go. Now, I mentioned that I want you to create, use this as a tracing layer. It looks like inspiration. It's not going to be part of my finished document. So I'm going to go ahead and put a new layer on top of this. So on the right-hand side here, I've clicked on the Layers tab. I'm going to come down to the bottom and do New Layer. That allows me to lock the layer at the bottom that has the photograph in it and do all of my drawing in layer 2, and then they are completely separate. And I can easily hide or delete the photograph layer when I'm done. All right, I do like to label all my layers, even more so than in Photoshop. It's going to be really important to keep your layers organized in Illustrator. There are many times where we will end up with literally hundreds of layers. And if we can't keep them organized, or hundreds of shapes, one of the things you're going to notice is in Illustrator, every mark you make, every shape you make becomes another line in your layers palette. So I'll just call this bottom one photo. Pear skin, because that's where I'm going to start. That's layer 2. So let's start with the pear skin. I'm going to zoom in a little here. I need to get in close enough that I can trace all the details, but not so close that I'm like having to worry, like my image is starting to fall apart on me and I can't tell what's going on. So I pick a nice sort of medium zoom and pick my starting point. And I might start up here near the stem on the outside edge of the pear. I'm going to start with the big shapes. So I want to start with the green skin of the pear. And we're going to do this whole drawing using the pen tool. There are definitely other ways to do this, but it is really valuable to become comfortable with the pen tool. So that's what we're going to use for everything in this. And I've got the pen tool selected. That was the third tool on the toolbar. And I am going to start with a click and a drag. Now remember, the pen tool works in 2 ways. If I click once, I get an anchor point, right? But when I do that, I get all straight lines. That's a single click followed by another click, another click. I don't actually want that. I want to have a smooth curve. My pear is not angular. So I want to do a click and a drag. So I click where I want my anchor point to go, and I pull the vector handle in the direction that I want my line to go. So in this case, I want to follow along the edge of the pear. My handles are probably not going to be really long, so I'll just do sort of like a medium length here, not too far out. And then I let go. Now I want to take my pen tool, and you can sort of see I've got this tail hanging onto my pen tool here. I'm going to take this down to the next anchor point I want to create. On something that is really smooth and round, I want to go as far as I can along this edge, and I'm going to do the same thing, click and drag. So I line this up on the edge of the pear here, click, without lifting my finger, I drag my anchor point. I'm watching that red line, right, to make sure that it lines up nicely with the actual edge of the pear and heads roughly in the direction I want the line to go next. So as I'm pulling this handle, I still haven't lifted my finger. As I pull this handle, I can see there's a line near the top there that I'm trying to stretch that out so it matches with the curve at the top of the pear. And then I want the bottom of the vector line, that's my, think of it as like the arrow telling me where to go next, to point down along the side of the pear skin. Okay, and then I'll let go. Now, a quick shortcut. I'm reaching the edge of my screen here. And so in order to move this over, I'm going to click one finger down on my space bar, and that brings up the hand, and I can slide my image over without setting down my tool. I still have my pen tool, but if I sort of, while I'm using a tool, hit the space bar, it switches to the hand real quick so I can move my image around. Okay, so I do that again. I come down the edge of the pear to the next point. I like to find points where I think it's about to change direction. So I'm going to go right before that like wide bump on the side there and click and drag. Again, I'm just carefully watching that red line to make sure it's aligning with the edge of the green skin. Space bar to get the hand, I can slide down. Now I want to go around this bump. Click and drag. If at any point you make an anchor point that you are not happy with, Command Z or Control Z, just do an undo, right? You could also go up to the edit menu. But like if I don't like this one, I do Command Z. I'm going to come back here. Just a short little handle, and then move further down. Click along the green skin. Drag that out to get just the curve I need, and let go. Again, spacebar for the hand, slide it down. Click and drag. And I'm going to work my way all the way around. And most of this pear is going to be just like this. I'm doing these long, smooth curves. Not so happy with that last one. Let's go back a little bit here. That was 2 undos. I just had to go back 2 steps to get back to that one that was just a little too far in. I think I had drawn the handle a little too long, stretched it out too far. Okay, now I have a problem. Right now, what I'm seeing is that my pear is covered. I'm going to zoom back out here so you can see. My pear is getting covered in this white fill. because the default of the shape was white and I hadn't changed that before I got started. It's no big deal for some shapes to have a fill color, but at this point, I can't see where I need to go next. So I'm going to come over to the Properties tab and choose a fill color, under Appearance where it says fill color, and change that to none. That's going to let me see what I've got. All right. And now I can see my red line and I can see the whole pear and I know where I need to go next. I also have another problem. Not a problem, it's just something I need to deal with. I am at the point where I don't want these long, smooth curves anymore, right? My pear has a bite out of it. So my next move is to make some angular changes in direction. So let's zoom in here and take a look at this. If I were to continue and click somewhere along here, I'm going to have like an extra little loop that sticks out where I don't want it. So before I make my next anchor point, I'm going to come and click once on this existing anchor point to change it to an angular anchor. It's basically, I'm converting the anchor point. So notice I take my pen tool and I'm going to roll back over that last anchor point I just made and click once. It basically takes off that leading handle, the one that was sticking up in my drawing, and lets me start to make some changes in direction, some sharp angles. I'll do that again here. So I've made a little curve here where that little chunk is missing. Click on the anchor point, and now I can continue along to my next so change in direction, right? So I'm going to keep going along here. I just want to follow the green, right? Imagine I'm drawing a green shape. This could be a green, like imagine it cut out of paper. It's the basic layer. It's going to be the base layer of my skin. So I'm just following that particular shape as best I can. So these are short little segments, click and drag along the edge of this green. Using my space bar to grab the hand and come over here. Oops, let's redo that last one. All right, clicking on an anchor point to convert it so it's no longer a curve if I want a sharp edge there, an angle. In the middle of this, this would be like a tooth, right? I'm going to click and drag to keep the curve going. And then when I get to the far end, I click and drag, but I come back and convert that anchor point to an angle. All right, so I've got my last sort of anchor point in the bite here, and then I'm going to start moving up the outside edge of the pear again. These are now those long, smooth curves. So I'm going to go as far as I can before it changes direction. Pull a nice, long, smooth handle. Slide this down, coming up towards the sort of curve around the top. Click and drag to make that curve. Drag, and I need to get back to my starting point. In order to have a closed form, like a solid outline of a shape, I need to get back to my starting point, and I'm just going to go right past the stem. I'm going to pretend the stem's not there. When we do the stem, we will actually do that as a shape on top, so I don't need to worry about that right now. And I'm going to come back to my starting point, which I see here, right? Zoom way in, you can see I'm coming back. And as I roll over that starting point, I should see a tiny little circle show up next to my pen tool. That tells me I have a closed form, and I'm going to click once there. Okay. If I zoom out and let's give this some color. Right. Now I have a single shape. It fills all of the skin. I don't necessarily need to give it color right now, but it is helpful to have something to see. And so I'm going to give it the color, but I'm actually going to hide that layer for a moment so that we aren't seeing that layer. All right, it's there. I'm turning off the visibility in the layers palette so I don't have to look at it, so I can draw some other things without thinking about it too hard. Okay. Now, let's look at the flesh of the pear. In order to draw the flesh of the pear, I don't have to draw all the edges. Notice that in the skin of my pear, I have drawn the edge on one side. I have drawn the edge where it meets up with the skin. So I don't really have to draw that shape. I just have to make sure that the new shape I draw goes underneath and is sort of masked or hidden by this edge that I've already drawn. So I'm going to create a new layer. We're going to call this pear flesh. It's underneath my pear skin. If it doesn't appear in the place where you want, you can click and drag your layers up or down. You'll want to make sure that it is underneath the pear skin in this case, if I want it to be hidden underneath the edge. All right, and then I'm going to turn off my pear skin for now. In fact, I'm going to lock that layer so that I can't mess it up. All right, and I'm going to zoom in here on this bite. All right, so pen tool again. I'm going to start at some edge. It doesn't really matter where. I'm going to maybe pick this top edge. And I'm going to work my way around the outside of this bite, the part that hasn't really been drawn yet. It's a little hard to see because it happened to assign me a green color for this layer. Each layer gets a new color assigned to it. And all of your paths will, appear in that color. And right now it's filling in with this green color that I used on the skin. That's because that was the last color I used. And that's okay. We're going to change that. Okay, so I'm back to the edge of my skin at the bottom here. I've done that whole outside edge, little clicks and drags, a few single clicks to get some angles in there. The next part, the other side of this shape, I'm going to just make some nice big jumps. I don't really care what this part looks like. I just want to make sure it goes underneath the skin that I've already drawn and that I come back to my starting point. So again, I can see that next to the pen tool, I have that little circle. I'm going to hover over that starting point and then click to close my shape. And then let's change this color. It's going to be something really light. In fact, I'm using these swatches here, but none of these swatches really seems right. So I'm going to click on the color mixer. That's the one that looks like the little paint palette. And that way I can really adjust the color of this flesh. All right, I'm just using these sliders here until I get something that looks about right. All right, let's turn on our skin layer. And you can see what happens. The skin shape is sitting on top of the flesh, so it's hiding this section on the left-hand side. The flesh comes out and matches this edge, and now it's starting to look a little bit like a bite, right? Always make sure that your shapes overlap. If you're careful about making sure that all your shapes overlap, you will never have little gaps that appear. Sometimes people don't see those gaps when they're working because you've got the photograph underneath. It's sort of filling them in. But once you eliminate the photograph, those become little white spots. So always good to overlap one shape on top of the other. All right, let's zoom out, see what we have. So this is the basics. My next step might be to put in the stem. And then I start to need some details. So let's quickly add the stem, and then I'm going to show you a few techniques for getting shadows and highlights. Okay. Always draw what you see, not what you think should be there. Sometimes we imagine what the stem should look like, and then in the end, that's not all that realistic. Undo that. And back to my beginning point. Of course, not the right color. I'm going to show you one more technique for color. I've just chosen none for the color of this shape that I've just drawn. I can take my eyedropper and come out here and choose a shape from my photo. That can be helpful if you're trying to match very closely. Notice that there are a lot of different colors in this stem, so I have to choose carefully, like I'm making an illustration. It's going to be simpler. It's not going to be quite as realistic. So I need to carefully choose my color. And I might go with a medium brown. Now, this is a good point to talk about some of our details. First off, in my stem, let's hide that. You'll notice that I have really like two facets to this stem. I have a top here. That's the little flat part where it was actually attached to the tree. And then I have the side of the stem. They're slightly different colors. That's what sort of defines the shape. So in my stem, I'm going to need a couple different shapes drawn to define those different facets. With the stem layer still highlighted, make sure that that's the one you're drawing on. I, in fact, have my other layers all locked, so I can't accidentally draw on the wrong layer. I'm going to come back and I'm going to draw another shape. So if my first shape was the whole stem, my next shape might be, let's start with this flat top. All right, so I'm going to make this visible. I'm going to make invisible that individual path. I want to be drawing on the stem layer, but I need to see what's there. So I'm going to hide the path. You'll notice it has no name. It's just called path in the layers menu. And then I will start drawing. And this is where you have to really use your eyes and think about, like, what can I see here? I'm going to go a little wider. Okay. This second shape is going to be a little darker. So I'm going to come to my color palette on the properties and make that a little bit darker. I'm just adjusting the black slider. I can adjust any of these colors as needed, right? So that gives it its flat top. If I want the side to look a little bit more, I want to capture the roundness of the vertical part of the stem. Maybe I need a shape for that. So again, I will hide my overall stem shape or path. And I'm going to come in here and maybe draw another shape. Start over here, work my way down. I'm working on the left side of the stem. I don't have to be super precise across the top because I'm going to make sure that this one goes underneath. This is going to be yet another color sort of in between. And then let's turn on our other layer there. And I'm going to adjust the order of the layers. I want that top of the stem to be the very top layer in this case. All right, and you can start to see some dimensionality coming into this. One thing that's happened is because I'm layering these shapes on top of each other and I'm drawing them without seeing them, I do have some little edges here that I need to adjust. So if I zoom really far in, you can see this. This shape I've just drawn doesn't quite line up with the one underneath it. I'm going to use the white arrow. It's because it depends which tool you're in, which color, or what do I want to say, which version of Illustrator you're in, which color these arrows are, because they changed them not too long ago. But the direct selection tool, that will let me find each individual anchor point, and I can click once on an anchor and drag that anchor. It's like I can just individually adjust and move. Click once to select the anchor, and then move it with a click and a drag. All right, that looks much better. Okay. So you can see how this pear is starting to develop. For the pear skin, you have a couple of options. You could choose to use some gradients, right? So if I click on the pear skin, let's see, we're going to unlock the pear skin layer and lock the stem. I always try to keep the layers I'm not working on locked. So everything else is locked. The pear skin is now unlocked. The pear skin just has one path so far. So I can select that one path. And I'm going to add a gradient. So I've selected the gradient tool and I've clicked on that shape in my drawing. Remember, there are a couple of ways to adjust gradients. You'll remember this from the last exercise. Once I have that there, I can come to the Properties tab and I have my gradient tool in my Properties tab, gradient options. I'm going to choose a radial gradient. And of course, I'm going to adjust the colors. I don't want a black and white pear. So in the gradient slider on the right-hand side, I see these, what they call the stops at the bottom. I'm going to double click on the black one and come to my palette and select a color. I can adjust that color as needed. So that's my darkest color on the right-hand side of this gradient. If I click out and then click on the stop on the left-hand side, the one that appears white at the moment. Let's make it yellow to start, and then I'm going to just adjust that a little bit. I need it to be lighter than the last one, but I don't want it to be so light that it looks like, a spotlight on my pear. Want it to look sort of natural. All right. Now, the question is, of course, where should this light be hitting the pear? That's where you have to go back to your photograph. I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to hide this layer for a moment, and I'm going to find that spot where it should be. The very brightest highlight is here towards the bite. And so I will center my gradient there. So select that shape. I get the gradient tool appearing. And remember that I can click on this white bar here and actually just move this tool wherever I want the center of my gradient to be. I also have the ability to sort of shrink that gradient. Let's see, that's going to be this one on the dot on the left. If I want it to be more localized, so most of the pear, full 100% dark green, pear green, light green, whatever that is, and that highlight to be really white. Okay. That's a start. It's not going to be enough to give this pear a real sense of dimension. So this is the point where you want to go in and start adding some shapes as well. In the layers palette, I'm still working within the pear skin layer. I'm going to hide this particular path, the one for the full skin, and look for some shapes that I could draw to add some shadows, mostly in this case. I know that I need some shadows near the bottom, maybe on the left-hand side, and definitely around the top near the stem. Otherwise, the stem doesn't actually appear to fall into that sort of recess, the hole where it is. So I'm going to take my pen tool and I'm going to draw some of the shapes I see. Really be looking. You're just looking for values or colors that are similar that create blocks. So I'm going to start here at the bottom, and I'm looking for just the sort of like outline of the medium green, medium dark shadow that is down here. And I'll start on the left-hand side. Remember that this may be a really irregular shape. Some of the photographs you might work from for the assignment are going to have very irregular shapes. Others are smoother. It just depends on the light and the particular variety of apple, really. All right, and I kind of see this stretching all the way up to the right. Then it comes way down here before it wraps around underneath. All right, I'm going to turn on the layer below it. I'm going to use the eyedropper to select that color so that they match. Eyedropper. Okay. And now I'm going to adjust. I really want this to become more of a shadow. And actually, I really want to get rid of my gradient. So let's delete the gradient. Nope, just deleted my color. Rid of the gradient. Okay. There we go. Be careful about going too dark or those shapes will really stand out. They won't look like shadows. I'm going to go sort of medium, a little bit darker than what I have. And it looks like I deleted an anchor point over here. Stretch this out to the edge here. There we go. Now I am going to come in here. See how I have a little gap? It doesn't match up here. I'm going to find the anchor point with my direct select arrow. Find the appropriate anchor point and line that up nicely so that I don't see any of the edges at the bottom that I think should be hidden. There we go. Okay. All right, this is the start. You will create many, many shapes to start to make the, give us the illusion that this pear really has dimension, that this bite has dimension, that there is a shadow around this top edge. You're just looking for all the elements, all the little components on that surface that as they start to layer, give us the sense of three-dimensionality, okay? I'm going to quickly open up a finished pear for you guys to take a look at. I've got a few here. There are a lot of different ways to interpret. So you could do something that is all flat shapes. You can see that the highlight here is created by layering multiple flat shapes, each slightly lighter than the last till we get to that bright highlight in the center. You'll see over here in my layers. Let's see what we've got here. We've got a shadow underneath. That's just an ellipse with a gradient in it. The bite, the pear skin, most of the pear skin, the highlight, the stem shadows, and the stem itself. Okay. Notice how those stem shadows really start to create the sense of that curve in. And tell me a little bit about the contour that's there. There's another one sort of similar. Here's one that was done a little differently. This one has a lot of the texture, the little sort of mottled spots from the pear. Those are just tiny little shapes that, if I'm honest, are repeated. So make 5 or 10 of them and then start copying and pasting. Keep them in their own layer though, because if I open up this layer, you'll see spots. These are those paths. Lots and lots of little spots. If I don't keep them organized in one layer, I can't hide or lock them or select them all at once. By keeping them in a layer, I'm able to turn them on and off. I can lock them and I can use the little circle at the right to select them all if I want to change the color of all of them. Okay. All right, I hope this gives you enough information to get started and do an apple. You'll see in the assignment that there are many student examples in the PDF that I've provided, and there are lots of different ways to interpret this. So looking forward to seeing your apples. Bye, everyone.